Morning. Can you hear me? We've reached 100 and let's begin.
Yes, Doc.
Sige. Okay. Morning, everyone. And what a wonderful morning it is. No? So today we'll be talking about one of the oldest and one of the most common diseases in the Philippines, tuberculosis. And I know that it has been repeated so many times. So this morning we'll just go through salient features of tuberculosis and then we can do a quick discussion. And after that, we'll also touch the topic of sleep apnea after this one. So for this morning, identify the basics, the signs and symptoms, as well as the diagnostics, the usual things that we've discussed already in our SGDs, then more of the treatment options, prognosis, and how to answer the questions, the most common questions that your patients may have for tuberculosis. So we know that tuberculosis or TB is caused by an aerobic bacteria called your Mycobacterium tuberculosis, one of the oldest from 1882 and still unfortunately not eradicated in third world countries, especially like ours. Mostly it affects the lungs, and we know that there are also extrapulmonary TB that lurks around. So, why is it so hard to kill this bacteria? So, because of these waxy cell walls, and basically the conditions of the environment are perfect for TB to thrive. It can thrive for several hours in respiratory droplets. However, it's actually quite easy to destroy for 20 minutes at 60 degrees Celsius or 5 minutes at 70 degrees Celsius. And it's very sensitive to direct sunlight. So TB may be classified as primary TB, and that's the 10%, showing acute illness directly following an infection of latent TB. And there may be evidence of exposure without active disease as well. We also have latent TB, where we have a skin test positive, but no evidence of active infection, and we also treat this type of TB. We also have secondary TB, or the adult type, or reactivation tuberculosis. This is a reactivation of previously acquired infection. So the immune system sometimes, latent infection, it's just there, no signs and symptoms. But as we age or as the immune response slows down, or if there is immunocompromised state, then tuberculosis may reactivate. There's over 1.8 billion cases of all forms of TB, and this is only in 2020. However, there is a rise of multi-drug resistant TB, and that's at 44% of those people, with an estimated death of 1.5 million a year. So this continues to be a global pandemic. The most startling is that about 9% are already multi-drug resistant tuberculosis case, and they have XDR-TB. Nothing actually works anymore. So in the Philippines, there's around 372 cases, and we have had a lot of progress in terms of TB-free Philippines. We have more than 3,000 treatment facilities as well as TB laboratories around the country. The estimated burden of those of the special population for HIV positive TB incidence is actually at 12,000 people already. Or we'll have around 11 out of every 100,000 HIV patients with tuberculosis. There are still more males having tuberculosis, and it affects the working population, fortunately. So we're number six in terms of leading cause of illness, and it's the sixth leading cause of death Its treatment coverage, unfortunately, is only 63%. However, for those who do undergo treatment, 91% of those are successfully treated. So again, it affects all ages, and it affects the most economically productive age group at 15 to 49, and it's found to be more prevalent in men. It's also among the malnourished, aside from those immunocompromised via HIV, as well as people with diabetes. It's also, as we know, twice as high in urban Metro Manila compared to the general population. So the cases can be attributable to the five risk factors of undernourishment, smoking, alcohol disorders, diabetes, and HIV. So there would be close contact, poverty, homelessness, drug abuse, as well as incarceration. Our senior citizens are also at risk, especially those who are living in nursing homes or long-term care facilities. How- And unfortunately for the Philippines, TB is really endemic in our country. Spread through air, transmitted through aerosol or droplet, inhalation through coughing. So the term they usually use for your physician licensure examinations are aerosolized respiratory droplets. Please take note of these keywords. So the signs would be cough, productive or not, within 2 weeks for the general population, or even less than 2 weeks if we're talking about healthcare workers. So we have few bands as our mnemonics for the symptoms and signs of TB. So fever, easy fatigability, weight loss, bloody sputum, anorexia, night sweating, and shortness of breath. There are different classifications of tuberculosis, and again, because we are in a very dynamic field, there may be changes over time to this. So there are terms of new classifications of TB. There is retreatment for those who have been treated before for at least a month, but they relapse. So that would mean that they're presently diagnosed and declared cured, but it the signs and symptoms are recurring. And then there's also treatment after failure. So that's previously treated but failed in the most recent sputum exam. In retreatment, this can also be classified for those people who have had their medications for at least a month. So there's that classification in the TB DOTS program would be treatment after loss to follow up. This means that these are the people who did not complete their medications for it and was lost to follow up for at least 2 months in their most recent regimen. There's also previous treatment outcome unknown. That's a classification for those who do not know or who did not get their final sputum examinations after the 6 months of medications. And there is also a classification for persons or patients with unknown previous TB history. This is usually for those who are critically ill and or those people who do not have any awareness of their previous treatments. So, a little trivia. So, before milk was routinely pasteurized, actually, so cattle was infected with another type of mycobacterium, and it was Mycobacterium bovis. So, this is the bovine variant of tuberculosis. And it actually could pass disease to humans who drank infected milk. So, it's quite a big problem, this mycobacterium. So, moving on, we have extrapulmonary tuberculosis. So anything outside the lungs. So it will develop as the primary infection will be in the blood or the lymphatic spread, and different areas aside from the lungs can be affected by this. So also bacteria, there's also a theory that bacteria may be coughed out from the lungs and swallowed. And by this route, it can also enter the lymph nodes of the neck and as well as produce gastrointestinal tract tuberculosis. So here are our extrapulmonary sites of TB, 40% of which are usually in the lymph glands and abscesses, particularly around the neck, the scrofula, and then down the line to the pleura, as well as your skeletal TB or your Pott's disease. And then in the genitourinary tract, in women, it's mostly in the uterus, and in men, in the epididymis. Renal TB is of also a thing, as well as TB meningitis, especially for our immunocompromised state. There is also another clinical presentation that's interesting, and we call this the miliary TB. So this is due to the hematogenous spread of your tubercle bacilli, and looks like millet seeds over here. So as you see in the picture, a very dirty looking X-ray. The lesions are usually on your actual lesions. They're usually 1 to 2 millimeter yellowish granulomas, and they call this that resemble millet seeds. So formally, we call this part of X-ray as miliary reticulonodular patterns. This is the clinical presentation for scrofula. Very familiar with this. And just a quick question. Hands up for those who have actually seen this or who know people who have tuberculosis. Sige daw. Can I just get a reaction? Have you seen something like this before? Wala? Yeah, Ana. Yeah. So usually it appears in singly, no? So for those that I have seen, mostly single na scrofula. They become swollen or painful. The patients would think that this is an ordinary infection because usually this does not come with the cough, the usual. But when you do a biopsy and AFP smear, it turns out positive. So we also have pleural TB as well as TB in the upper airways. And these are the presentations on top of the usual few bands, the mnemonics that we had. So there may be pleuritic chest pain and dyspnea, as well as dullness to percussion in terms of pleural TB. And in the upper airways, this may present as hoarseness, dysphonia, and dysphagia, aside from to, the chronic cough. So in skeletal TB, these can affect weight-bearing joints, and the spine is well, the usual area, followed by the hips and the knees. So spinal TB or the Pott's disease, otherwise also known as tuberculous spondylitis. Please take note of these three terms because these are usually interchanged as trick questions in physician licensure exams. So spinal TB, Pott's disease, tuberculous spondylitis. So this involves often greater than two adjacent vertebral bodies and presents with back pain. Uh, there is also a differential here because some would say that these might be musculoskeletal disorders, even to the point of saying that these might be cancer. However, when you do your your examinations, it turns out to be tuberculosis. Worst case scenarios for this would be there would be spinal cord compression and the patient ends up with paraplegia. In our diagnosis, the old school diagnosis for TB used to be two specimens taken. Even there was a point of time where it was three specimens of your direct sputum smear microscopy. However, this time around, we already have other diagnostic tests. So we already have our gene expert. The chest x-ray is also going to be a debate. So is your chest x-ray the diagnosis of choice? What is the classification in terms of the diagnosis of TB? Is it the gold standard? Is it just one of the options? Or do we say someone has tuberculosis based solely on a chest x-ray? What do you think? Has anyone here worked for a TB dot center before? I assume there's none. Sige. So for the chest x-ray, this is actually one of the things that guide us, especially when we see granuloma formation or your millet seed formations in the chest x-ray. However, we do not confirm TB by just using chest x-ray. We usually use the history always, the epidemiology, the abnormal radiograph. For kids, we also do a positive tuberculin skin test and a positive sputum smear. And there may also be a determination of your ADA for pleural TB. And now, the diagnostics of choice would be your gene expert. So your expert MTB or RIF. This is a rapid assay and it detects presumptive MDR-TB or HIV-associated TB as well as rifampicin resistance. So previously, there was also TB culture and drug susceptibility testing, but it may take at least 8 weeks or 6 to 8 weeks to do it. So there is a move towards using expert MTB rather than this. There are even newer tests that are being downloaded right now, and that's the NAAT or your nucleic acid amplification technology, which is a TB lamp assay. So currently, this may be used as a replacement for your sputum smear. So the sputum smear microscopy is now used for monitoring of tuberculosis rather than diagnosing tuberculosis. So our treatment goals would be to interrupt the transmission. So there is an initial bactericidal phase, and we also want to cure using the continuation or sterilizing phase. The principle is to use multiple drugs and over a long duration to prevent emergence of resistance as well as to prevent recurrence. So this is the shortcut. So HRZE, isoniazid, rifampicin, pyrazinamide, ethambutol, plus minus your streptomycin. This is your standard drug regimen for TB. But we don't usually ask questions just for standards, no? So these are the medications that are available to us since 1944. And if you notice, we stopped at 1992 with levofloxacin. There are no new drugs for tuberculosis. It's still in the pipeline. So you can take a picture of this. In terms of your dosage regimens, these are very important. The shortcuts for your daily dose MKD or milligrams per kilo per day would be your H5, R10, Z25, and E15. So this is a short mnemonic to help you adjust the doses of your patients. So according to their weight over here. So please take a picture of this as well. So this is the dosage regimen for those. And then at the TB dots, they also have a shortcut for this according to body weight. So for example, if you have a 50-kilogram patient, they usually give 3 tablets worth of HRZE for 2 months in the intensive bactericidal phase, and also then give a continuous phase of 3 tablets per day for 4 months of your H and R to complete the 6 months regimen for tuberculosis disease. We also have second line drugs, and I suggest that you take a picture of these as well. So we have our antibiotics, levofloxacin, moxifloxacin, and then we have ethionamide, prothionamide, cycloserine, and our PAS, the p-aminosalicylic acid, as well as bedaquiline and clofazimine. So we were able to visit at one point a TB program where patients are actually housed near the health facility just to make sure that they drink their medications. So these are MDR TB patients. And if you have a chance to visit these facilities, Eversley Sanitarium has this particular type of regimen, and you can see the patients line up and get these medications. And every day it's actually very taxing for them to line up. However, it's really important to really see that the TB DOTS program is the direct observation and treatment program where health workers facilitate and make sure they drink all of these things on a daily basis. Sometimes it does not um, work so well. And so we've also used linezolid, coamoxiclav, as well as high dose of isoniazid and imipenem and meropenem in our regimen. Okay. Thankfully, the FDA is also introducing some breakthrough medications for XDR-TB. So remember, 9% of the entire TB population are already XDR. So they've also developed pretomanid, and then they're already doing linezolid left and right as well as bedaquiline, and the effectivity of these newer drugs would be at around 90% for XDR-TB cases. So however, the TB medications have the side effects, so usually with the skin rashes, blurred vision, stomach ache, and all of these things. So we'll go through that and provide a guide now. So just highlighting, we know that rifampicin causes orange-red urine color, so just reassure the patient. And then jaundice of any kind may happen due to hepatitis. So any kind of the drugs for TB may cause this. And what we do is we discontinue it for a while and refer to specialists. So usually there is a portion where we reintroduce the medications one at a time. So we know which one is causing jaundice. And we need to ensure that the liver function tests are also normalized first. So another highlight would be the side effect of ethambutol, which would be optic neuritis. Be wary of that. And streptomycin may cause hearing impairment, among other things. So TB can also be monoresistant, polyresistant, and rifampicin resistant, as well as multi-drug resistant. So what is the difference between MDR TB and extensively drug resistant TB? So for multi-drug resistant, this is resistance to at least isoniazid and rifampicin, with or without the resistance to other anti-TB drugs, whereas your extensively or XDR-TB is resistance to any fluoroquinolone and to at least one of the three second-line injectable drugs like capreomycin, kanamycin, and amikacin. So this is a review of the causes of drug resistance in TB, but usually it's the non adherence to the initial drug therapy. A special consideration would be for HIV associated TB, where we use the TB drugs regardless of the CD4 cell count. So we also use our antiretroviral therapy with TB drugs. So all the HIV infected TB patients, they are still candidates for your ART or antiretrovirals. And this antiretrovirals optimally is initiated as soon as possible, even after the diagnosis of TB and within the first 8 weeks of anti-TB therapy. So we do not wait for us to finish the TB medications before starting the antiretrovirals. This can be given simultaneously. In terms of old school testing, we have tuberculin skin testing. You can take a picture of this. So just a sample for the classification of the reactions. So before we used greater than 15 millimeters reaction or wheel formation to say that it's positive for TB. However, right now we use either 5 millimeters is already positive, especially for HIV patients and organ transplant patients. And we use the reference for greater than 10 millimeters for IV drug users and those who are in jail or incarcerated, as well as healthcare workers, especially those working in mycobacteriologic labs. So there are special considerations for latent TB infection. So we use and send these patients to go to St. Luke's. So they have their interferon release assays. There's the TB spot test and the quantiferon test. So this, uh, we also have IGRA already. So this is reported to be more specific, and it really does uh, wonders in terms of the diagnosis of latent TB. So no symptoms, but IGRAS positive would need uh, medications for these patients. So usually it's isoniazid alone for 6 to 9 months or rifampicin alone for 3 to 4 months. So there is a regimen as well for your latent MTB infection. Please take a picture of this. This is good to know for now, but if you're going to be exposed in the communities later on with TB DOTS program, this will be your basis for treatment. So there is a national TB control program with localized implementation of TB programs in each of the barangay health centers, and they give accreditations for TB DOTS. So they monitor health systems, and then the TB program also engages the public through regular health educations through our BHWs, through the doctors, through the nurses, and even the midwives. So we really need to address this and increase the case detection rate to 90% so that we'll have a success rate of greater than 90 as well. This is part of our MDG to reduce the prevalence and mortality of TB by greater than half. And this was in 2015 still. This has been updated, but we're still not reaching target, unfortunately. So we continue with the dots, and that's still the strategy that's being used in the Philippines. And this is also WHO approved. However, there's a lot of things that we need for this to be successful. First of all, political commitment, and then quality assured testing, as well as supervised treatment, both for your basic dots and your PMDTs or the specific facilities for your MDR-TBs and XDR-TBs. There needs to be uninterrupted supply of your TB program, needless to say, and program monitoring. However, there have been challenges logistics-wise previously. So we have different facilities for that. And then on practical terms, I would love for you to teach your patients on the very easy cough etiquette so that you can do this as part of your health education for them. So we need to ensure good ventilation, a clean environment, that they continue to follow up with us and have a healthy lifestyle. So in prevention, we have the BCG vaccine. So this can provide 80% protection for 15 years if given before the first infection. So going back, quick question just to make sure you're still there. Is TB hereditary?
No, Doc.
No. Very good. So these are actually some questions that are frequently asked by our patients, no? So we need to make sure they know that it's not passed on from mom to daughter or son. It's not the way to go. So we need to tell them it's air droplets and they can get it when they're exposed to people who through their coughs, sneezes, or spit. No? So, can a person die of TB? Yes, of course, if not treated enough. Does TB afflict only the thin, the elderly, or the poor people?
No, no.
No. What's the answer then? What do you answer when you are asked by your patients on this?
The immunocompromised, doc.
Hmm. Okay.
No, no.
Immunocompromised. What else?
All of us can be affected, Doc.
Correct. The better answer also is that all of us can affect all ages. So everybody is at risk. Sige. One moment. Sige. So, however, there is higher risk for the malnourished, immunocompromised. Can one contract TB from doing heavy work? So, there are people who say, Dok, apoy manggug kaayo, I do manual labor, and then that's why I got TB.
No, doc.
How do we counter this? So, the answer is still no, and heavy work may lead to a lowering of the body's resistance or immune system. So the person may become susceptible to the disease, but there is no direct connection between having heavy work and the disease. Can a person contract TB from too much drinking or smoking?
Yes, doc.
How?
Um, being in the same area, doc, with affected people as well.
Okay,
And
so
for
it
smoking, lowering the resistance as well, immune resistance.
okay. Sige. So this is a trick question actually, no? So in general, no, you can't get it directly from too much drinking, but you are correct when you're exposed to patients who have TB while you're having a drinking session and especially if you have a weak immune system. Okay, sige. Kanina lang, the last one. Is there a need to separate the personal belongings, especially utensils of the TB patient?
Yes, doc.
Why is that? What? Please defend your answer.
Because you can contract TB through the use of those who are infected.
Okay, sige. So, this is the common explanation, no? And even I remember my PHN, the nurse in the communities have this in their mindset, no? Because exposure and all that. But however, let's break that myth, okay? So it's actually a no. There's no need to separate because TB is actually transmitted through inhalation of aerosol. So it's aerosolized respiratory droplets, remember? So different siya. But sanitation wise, now you may want to do that, but it's really not necessary because you're ostracizing the person also. Okay. Sige. So there's also a question sometimes that the patient, can they breastfeed? So a woman, yes, can have anti-TB drugs as well as continue to breastfeed. Okay. So allow me to stop share here. And for the next few minutes, I would like to talk to you about sleep apnea. You can read about this as well. So just a quick overview and some treatment approaches. Okay, can you see the slides?
Yes, Doc.
Yes, sir. Okay. Sige, for sleep apnea, this is really rather quick na lang. So we just want to differentiate this sleep apnea with other diseases and more on the clinical and diagnostic findings with the treatment options. So sleep apnea is actually the intermittent cessation of airflow, and there is a category for this. So greater than 10 seconds during sleep. So that's how the formal definition of it. So the sleep apnea syndrome is the clinical disorder that arises from this recurrent apneas during sleep. So there are also definition of terms for different for OSAS and CSA. So OSA, or your obstructive sleep apnea hypopnea syndrome, this is caused by the occlusion of the airway, whereas there is also a certain category called central sleep apnea. This is caused by the absence of respiratory effort. So sometimes this can actually be mixed as well. The prevalence, it's 2% of middle-aged women and 4% of middle-aged men for your obstructive sleep apnea. For mild, about 20% of adults are usually affected. So one out of every five of us here have OSA. And in terms of prevalence, it's the typical picture is a male in the 30s or 60 years of age. And then for women, OSA is usually typically postmenopausal. Obesity plays a big risk, especially in Western populations, where 50% of their sleep apnea patients have a BMI greater than 30 kilograms per meter squared. So alcohol use, as well as the shortening of mandibles with structural reduction in airway sizes and all those things can cause sleep apnea as well. Other factors that may cause this would be your hypothyroidism or acromegaly, and smoking, as well as nasal congestion. Also, a special population for sleep apnea would be people with myotonic dystrophy, with Ehlers-Danlos, as well as Down syndrome, as well as those with Treacher-Collins syndrome. So the major cause would be the decrease in upper airway muscle tone as well as lumen size. There would be for your central sleep apnea. On the other hand, there's a transient abolition of your central drive of the ventilatory muscles. This is usually because of the defects in your metabolic respiratory control system, or there's something wrong with the neuromuscular apparatus or HAPTERCAP. There is that hypercapnic CSA, and there's also the Ondin syndrome where there's primary and secondary central alveolar hypoventilation, and respiratory muscle weakness for the elderly, senile, and critically ill can also cause central sleep apnea. The signs and symptoms, double check if you have this, no? So if there is reported snoring, excessive daytime sleepiness, so most, if not all of us who went through med school and currently in med school are at risk for this. It's sleep attacks, and then there's witness apneas during sleep, depression, and as well as difficulty concentrating and decreased libido. So there would be poor sleep, sleep maintenance insomnia, and the morning headache are also signs and symptoms, as well as daytime fatigue and sleepiness. So usually, if we were face to face, I would have somebody do this now and answer this. This is called the Epworth Sleepiness Scale Scoring System. You can take a picture of it or you can look it up on the internet. Double check if your Epworth Sleepiness Scale is greater than 11. So this is actually a warning sign that you may have your OSA or sleep apnea. So please use this, and this is also useful when you test your patients for it. Other laboratory tests that you can do is a CBC. You can check for the thyroid profile, especially the thyroid stimulating hormone. And you can also do imaging studies on the sinuses. So this may reveal sources of obstruction. There may also be sleep studies that you can use, a little bit more expensive, but is a utilization of your overnight recording and polysomnography. So it will look something like this. So there is an EEG, ECG, there is monitoring of your oronasal airflow, as well as your pulse oximetry and limb EMGs. Okay. So the majority of persons who snore, actually, let me just clarify, do not have OSA. Also, it's really, you need to diagnose this clinically as well as add your diagnostics. So there is also a differentials with obesity, hypoventilation syndrome or your Pickwickian syndrome. Narcolepsy is also another differential, as well as alcohol or sedative abuse. Depression can also uh, have a differential for your OSA, as well as seizure disorders and panic attacks. And recently, most often than not, with our current working status, shift work related sleep disorders and insufficient sleeps can also be differentials for this OSA. So we manage it by treating the underlying conditions usually and by severity. So here you can use CPAP. These are very popular ones, and the mechanism of actions for CPAPs would be to prevent your upper airway occlusion by mechanically splinting the pharyngeal airways using positive pressure that maintains your airway patency. So basically, uh, you look like an alien when you're sleeping, no? So thankfully this time around they already have nasal CPAPs which are more portable and you can and travel friendly. So these are your treatments of choice in people with severe OSA. So these are also superior to more conservative therapies and well tolerated. So the effect would be improved sleep quality and reduces the daytime sleepiness as well as driving accidents. That is actually top 10, part of the top 10 causes of death for Filipinos. It does have certain side effects, and there is still a question whether it really works or not in terms of the benefit versus how expensive these are. Other options would be weight reduction, bariatric surgery, avoidance of alcohol and smoking cessation, and the avoidance of sleeping in supine posture, so side lying. Mandibular repositioning splints are also becoming popular, and this modifies the position of mandible and tongue. So there's a lot on the internet for this. So others, lastly, would be surgery. There would be jaw advancement surgeries, tracheostomy, bariatric surgery, and even tonsillectomy. But these are really last resort options. So generally, no medications are used for this. Okay. So we just need monitoring. We know that these are the complications that we do not want. Okay. Sige. So thank you very much for joining today. Uh, I hope that you'll help your patients. And for the practical advice, please ask them to stop smoking and to stop drinking alcohol. Okay? Sige. So, thank you very much, my dears. Have a good day.
Thank you, Doc.
Thank you po, Doc.
Okay, Doc.
Thank you,
Thank you,
Doc.
Doc.
Thank you, Doc.
Bye.
Yorms, online test ako, Ani, sa neuro after this lecture.